Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Discourse Education Podcast. My name is Chang. You can call me Mr. Chang. I'm the General Paper H2 History and O Levels English teacher at the Discourse Education, a premium tuition service or tuition center rather in Singapore, and we offer tuition services for A levels, O levels, and PSLE. In this podcast, essentially what we do is we would cover some of the key current affairs from the past week, and we break them down and analyze them, and pitch it at a level that's suitable for students taking the A levels general paper and O levels English, and essentially is to provide the students with more value and current knowledge of current affairs such that they can use it in their exams, essays, and all that. And of course, we also accept questions from our viewers. It doesn't matter whoever's watching this, right? If you have a question on H2 history, English, or even general paper, or you just like to submit a question, start a conversation, right? Start a discourse. Okay, yeah, you're welcome to do so. The link, for you to submit a question will be in the description below. And yeah. So without further ado, let's get into it. Today we'll be talking about two events, as per usual. And the first one is quite a tragic one. It just came out on the news today as of filming this particular video that there was yet another mass shooting in the USA. And yeah. So as you can see right here, this time round the mass shooting occurred in Kansas City, right? So right after their Super Bowl win over, I can't remember who their opponents were, which this Super Bowl game occurred a couple of days ago, and as the city was celebrating their own victory, this mass shooting happened over there. So now for the Singaporean viewers, you might be wondering what the Super Bowl is, because obviously we don't follow American football. Neither do I, to be honest, but the Super Bowl essentially is the finals, or essentially the largest game, right? The most important game for the National Football League in USA. So the NFL, that's where the teams play American football, all right? And yeah, so it's one of, if not the biggest, in fact I would say it is the biggest sporting event in USA every year. And a victory in that particular competition is pretty much equivalent to, if let's say you watch football, winning the UEFA Champions League. Yeah. So, or if you are talking about a game between your different nations, the World Cup or the Euros or so on and so forth. You get where I'm coming from. Now, the thing is that this unfortunate news came out, earlier today, right before we started filming this video, and yeah, it's just another mass shooting yet again. All right. So at this juncture, it's very easy to get very desensitized to all these news. Certainly because the rates of mass shootings have been increasing like crazy in the past, few years, right? And as you can see right here, according to I think, yeah, the Gun Violence Archive, this Kansas City shooting is the 48th mass shooting in 2024. 48. And we are only in February. So, I mean, all these things have been occurring pretty much, so frequently for the past few years, right? And I guess for this particular segment here, when we are talking about this particular case, we need to analyze it more so than understanding the details of this particular event on its own. All right, because the event is very straightforward, just a whole bunch of idiots, right? Obviously this story is still developing as of filming this video, so there are no confirmed suspects yet. All right, as in there are suspects, but they haven't really caught anybody nor prosecuted anyone yet. Yeah, so one idiot or more decided to ruin someone else's, or everyone else's day, and just go down and commit this absolutely atrocious crime, right? But certainly what we then need to understand is how does something like that occur. So in this particular segment, what we are gonna do instead is really answer three big questions here. How does this occur? Why does it occur? And of course, the difficulties, or rather, what are the difficulties of stemming this particular problem in the context of the USA? Now, I think for the first two questions, how and why does it occur? It can be easily melded into one, in the sense that we can answer both questions using the same response, and that really is down to the culture of the USA. All right, so for Singaporean viewers especially, if you're watching this, it is somewhat difficult to understand such things, or even to imagine such things occurring in our country, because certain things are outlawed, right? Let's say the use of firearms, or possession of firearms is outlawed in Singapore. We even outlaw drugs. We take a very, very heavy approach towards curbing a lot of these things that would lead to violent crimes, especially vices and all that. So it is very hard for us to imagine, right? And certainly the tragedy is just, yeah, it's just horrible, right? But when we talk about the culture of the USA, specifically what we are talking about is this thing called the Second Amendment. So under the USA's constitution, right? In case you're wondering, in case you're wondering, the constitution essentially refers to the highest body of laws, by which citizens and of course the government itself has to abide. In the US Constitution, the first 50 articles, or the first 50 amendments, sorry, collectively is called the Bill of Rights. And within these first 50 amendments, the Second Amendment specifically, it points towards the possession of firearms, because we need to understand the history of USA's War of Independence, because USA in the past was obviously colonized by the British people, all right? And sorry, I got distracted by a business SMS, all right? So yeah, continuing from there. So the Brits colonized US in the past, and then of course, if you know your American history, the founding fathers of USA, so George Washington and all those, they came together. They wrote, they got Ben Franklin to write the Declaration of Independence in 1776. Was it Ben Franklin? Let me just fact check that. Yeah, so I mean, Ben Franklin was involved, but of course, you had John Adams, Roger Sherman, Robert Livingston, and of course Thomas Jefferson, right? They were the ones who wrote the Declaration of Independence. So the idea, simply put, is that because USA wanted independence and they had to fight for it. That's a very very long story, condensed into a simple one. That's why when the USA finally became independent, right, and were able to pass all these Bill of Rights, in its constitution, the Second Amendment essentially allows its citizens, right, making it the Second Amendment made it a constitutional right for their citizens to possess firearms in case a tyrannical government ever, comes into power. That means in the event that the democracy fails, right? Because obviously USA is a democratic nation, and in place comes an authoritarian one, right? Or not even authoritarian, a totalitarian one. Okay, then the citizens have the ability to rise up against the totalitarian government and essentially fight for democracy again, and fight for the restoration of a republic, or so on and so forth so because of that historical context, right, that's why when it comes to a question of possession of firearms, the Americans see it as a right to the point whereby it's almost sacred in a way. Okay, not to say that it is something that's outright, sacred, because I mean, obviously, as you know, USA is a quite a highly religious nation as well, right? And certainly, they are not as fanatic about their guns as much as their religion, but it is quite close. Okay, so if let's say we want to talk about the ability of all these bad faith actors to come out and commit all these horrible crimes, right, the ability is right there. It is right there. All right, so that's reason number one. Okay, so it enables. Okay, maybe I should clean this up further. This is due to the historical context and culture of the USA. Second Amendment, blah blah blah, enables bad faith actors to abuse this right and commit all these horrible crimes. Okay, so that's the first thing. Second reason, and I guess this is not limited to the Kansas City mass shooting. We are looking at other things as a whole, right? The second reason as to like why things like that occur as well is linked to the issue of the culture war. And we have already done a video on the culture war. If you haven't seen it, go and check it out. All right, so culture war. The thing is that in that video I explained that there was this split that's going on between the extreme right and the left leaning people in the USA. Okay, but the issue is that the propensity, sorry, I shouldn't use the word propensity, the in terms of the statistical sort of probability, I guess, the probability of the mass shooter being an extreme right-wing conspiracy theorist, and that's putting it nicely already. For me, I'll just call them all these nut jobs. All right, the probability of all these mass shooters being all these crazy people is extremely high. All right, and that stems from a deeply seated distrust of the system. And this is where we need to again, I don't want to make any conclusions about this because as I said earlier, the story is still developing, but it's also related to things like the Taylor Swift psyops conspiracy theory shit that all these right-wing nuts were touting, all right, uh, before the Super Bowl itself, because obviously one of the star players of Kansas City, I can't remember, I think Travis Kelsey, I think that's his name, is dating Taylor Swift, right? So because of that, a lot of all these right-wing people were saying, hey, all these things, is a whole psyops thing to try and influence Americans to vote blue instead of vote red, i.e., vote for Democrats instead of vote for Republicans. So, I mean, you can just look it up, right? So, Taylor Swift conspiracy. And then, yeah, you can just look it up here. Yeah. So, they are essentially saying that, hey, they're dating so that they can help the Democrats, right? But it's just a whole bunch of crazy shit. I mean, if you're interested, you can go and look it up yourselves, right? Yeah, this one over here. Okay, you can go and look it up yourselves, all right? But coming back to this issue of the mass shooting and the culture war, because the idea is very simple. If you fundamentally believe in something, because that's what all these people believe, they believe that there is this deep state conspiracy that's going on, this cabal of powerful and influential individuals who would control every single aspect of US governance, right? And so the only way to deal with things like that is to take a very, very extreme stance on it, you know. So that's how January 6th occurred, right? The January 6th attempted coup d'etat, that's how it occurred. That's how all these mass shootings occur, because if there's such a deeply seated distrust of the system, okay, then in their minds, in their very warped, or rather based on their very warped and twisted logic, okay, things that occur against, their own worldviews become, how do I put this? A carefully orchestrated conspiracy, right? So if Democrats win, it's a conspiracy. If Republicans win, then everything is working correctly. That's their mindset, all right? And that's why even something as simple as people just living their lives, just going to celebrate their team winning a very, very significant sporting event in that country, it becomes something that's political, right? But again, as I said, allegedly, like, I'm not even going to say allegedly that's what happened, because obviously the story is still unfolding. But if we look at a lot of the previous mass shootings as well, right? So most notably, I think it was, yeah, here we go, right? So as you can see, this Anti-Defamation League report, okay, in 2022, all right, all the extremist related murders in 2022 were committed by right-wing extremists of various kinds. So the thing is that such, I guess, a warped logic or twisted logic is also not limited to just the USA. I mean, if you look outside it, obviously the most obvious example tragically would be the Christchurch shootings of 2019 in New Zealand. Locally, we recently detained this kid, all right, who drew inspiration from the Christchurch shootings and planned to go and attack a couple of mosques in Singapore. And, even in Japan, right, even though it's not so much related to right-wing stuff, but you also had the in Japan, you also had the Kill Annie, fire attack, whereby people with just very, very warped logic, and then they go and commit all these horrible, horrible crimes. So, we have a second potential example here, which is that sort of very, very warped conspiracy theorist sort of thinking that would compel all these individuals to commit all these gruesome acts of violence, in order to, I guess, perpetrate or to create a world that suits their own worldviews. All right. And consequently, obviously, that leads to very, very low tolerance for any sort of discourse or any sort of, a logical discussion that's based on fact. I mean, obviously, that's those two are the societal wide sort of explanations. On an individual basis, you can also look at it in terms of sociopathy or even psychopathy. All right, so you have cases like oh god, what was his name again? So the Parkland, Florida mass shooter, I think he committed that crime in 2018 or 2019. Nicholas Cruz, I think that was his name. Yeah. If you have seen JCS Criminal Psychology's video, you would know that he was trying to act crazy or what. But from an individual standpoint, you can also see, like, why is it that certain individuals might feel compelled to, or not say might feel compelled, might feel that it's okay, right, to even do all these things in the first place. So we can view it from these perspectives, essentially: the societal wide cultural conflict perspective, or the individual sociopathy or psychopathy sort of perspectives. Or sometimes even, it might not necessarily be a case whereby the mass shooter is a sociopath, but perhaps, the parents didn't teach them well, or it could be a question of upbringing, or even missing parents, maybe because they were orphaned, or so on and so forth. Like Nicholas Cruz, he's orphaned, or yeah, he was orphaned when he was young. Or if we talk about a local example, right, the biggest idiot, okay, in Singapore, right, who's currently jailed and officially registered as a sex offender in the US. What's his name? Amos E. Yeah, I think. Yeah, there's a deeper story there to consider as well. So, if we were to, expand upon this and use it as a point of analysis, right? Potentially flawed upbringing and background as well, right? So these are the ways in which you can use this particular example as an example for your essays, all right? Now, of course, at this juncture, then we want to ask ourselves, okay, then how is it that, USA don't do anything to try and stop it, right? Because I've had questions like these before. To be clear, it's not as though the government is not doing anything to try and stop it. It's more of the inherent difficulties, surrounding this particular issue, specifically in relation to gun control. Because number one, obviously, we are talking about the difficulty of gun laws reform or regulations regarding guns, right? So that's why we talked about the Second Amendment earlier. Because if any US lawmakers attempt to, try and pass through a bill that is, related to gun law reforms, or, increasing regulations for guns and all that, yeah, that's not gonna happen, because the Second Amendment is something that, as I said earlier, almost sacred to Americans. So there will be a lot of pushback, right, against all these potential gun laws. And for us here in Singapore, it's quite easy to imagine that, we can just say, hey, why not just ban guns, right? Because that's exactly what we did. But in USA, yeah, that's not gonna happen, right? Number two, even if, let's say, the government or any sort of state governments lah, or any politicians, right, even if they manage to convince their electorate, so that means the voters, of a need for all these gun laws reform, or regulations, increasing regulations, there will be these people around, right? So I think in previous videos we have already briefly covered like what political lobbying is. Okay, so political lobbying, just as a quick refresher, it means you not sorry, let me rephrase that. It means certain interest groups, to put it in very simple terms, campaigning, right, to the government or to certain politicians, so your senators or representatives in the House of Representatives, if we are talking about it on a federal level, and petitioning them to kill off any sort of gun reforms. All right. So in Singapore, and typically how that occurs is, through things like donations, or, certain sort of yeah, you get what I mean. In Singapore, we consider that corruption, obviously. But in the USA, speaking of the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment, okay, under the First Amendment, all right, companies or individuals have the right to seek the government for redress for any sort of issues. So political lobbying is a form of them exercising their freedoms of speech. So that's why when you have attempted gun laws reforms in the US, it's going to be very difficult, because then you have the NRA, the National Rifle Association, all right, a very, very powerful lobby, okay, coming in to kill gun reform. All right, that's the second issue. Or rather, those are the two issues specifically related to, regulations, because again, if you apply the concept that, or the government as an institution is meant to take care of the citizens, right, the short and long term problems, okay, then how do they do that? They do it through laws and policies. But in this case, state governments or even the federal government, they can't really do all these things because of these two problems over here. Now, and of course, the third problem really is once again related to the culture war, because to fundamentally reduce all these mass shootings, okay, not only do they need to regulate the guns, which, as I said, is not gonna happen, right? And yeah, there's also the issue of the culture war that's happening, and that entails essentially, what word do I want to use here? Deprogramming conspiracy theorists. Okay, which is a very, very difficult thing to do, because, as I said earlier, over here, right, anything that occurs against their own worldviews is seen by them as a sort of carefully constructed conspiracy. So then they will not trust it at all. So there's this quote, okay, that I heard on this documentary called, I think it's called Behind the Curve. It's a documentary on flat earthers, right? One of the scientists, I can't remember his name, he mentioned that the way they think is it doesn't matter what sort of evidence you present them that the earth is not flat, right? They would say that's not true, that's fabricated by the deep state and those in power, this is not true. So they reject anything that is based on empiricism and hard facts and evidence because it doesn't conform with their worldviews. So when it comes to the cultural war itself, especially for all the right wing nuts who would be crazy enough to have zero compunctions whatsoever to come out and commit all these hideous crimes, it entails deprogramming them because their minds are just so damn warped in terms of the logic already. Okay, no, zero basis in facts whatsoever. Just everything can be made up, and the normalization of this craziness obviously became much more acute when POTUS 45 became POTUS 45, right? If in case you're wondering who I'm referring to, and that's Donald Trump. So how then are you going to reach people who would essentially start off, right, not believing every single thing that you say? How are you going to argue based on logics and facts? Because if you bring out logic or fact, then they'll say no, you are influenced by the deep state. No, you are fake news. Blah blah blah. Anything that doesn't conform with facts becomes fake news. Becomes, yeah. So that is the third difficulty here of stemming this problem in a context of USA, right? And that's why for the foreseeable future, all these very, very, very tragic cases of mass violence will continue to occur as long as all these issues continue to stay in place. And yeah, therein lies the difficulty of, or rather, therein lies the complexity of this entire issue. The only thing really that we can be sure of is for that one, poor soul that passed away because of this case, and of course all the other victims who were injured and all that, keep them in your thoughts, right? And if you are religious, pray for them, and just hope that something like this occurs less often, because at the end of the day it's still the loss of human lives, and the trauma and all the impacts of all these events on a person's life, it doesn't go away easily. So yeah, that's that for this particular segment. All right. So yeah, so obviously, I mean, if you have, before we go on and talk about something more light-hearted but albeit still kind of sad in a way, if you have any questions, all right, regarding general paper or history or O levels English, please submit a question using this link here. All right. And yeah, it's just a very tragic thing, very unfortunate thing that's happening in the US now, right? So how to use, I forgot to mention this, but how to use this example in your essays, actually we already kind of broke it down already. So using all the different perspectives to explain the causation of all these issues, and of course the examining the difficulties of dealing with all these. Yeah, so the difficulties can be used as a form of evaluation or even counter argument, and then of course the why does it occur is either a supporting argument or counter argument. So yeah, but anyway, if you have a question, please submit your question here and we will get to it. whenever we can. And yeah, that's it for this segment.